It's recording.
All right, welcome to Body Smart Book Club, where we share the best of what we've read. So we got a good crew with us today. I'm Mark, this is Melody, Cameron, and Preston. I didn't call you the wrong name this time, so it's a good day.
That's pretty good.
So thanks for joining us today. I just wanted to give a brief overview about what we're going to be talking about today. And really the main points are the idea of building into training load. And as we're doing that, we're going to be consistent. We'll talk a little bit more about that. But all of our training really needs to be individualized. And we'll talk about some ways we can do that and why that's important. And then, I know we always kind of come back to this topic, the topic of recovery, obviously huge in any training plan, and something that we really want to focus on. And so that's really going to be kind of our big overview of what we're doing today. But Melody is really gearing up for her 100-mile race. It's coming up soon. And so we just wanted to check in, see how that's going. I know you just did your last big run. So let's hear about that.
Yeah, so 2 weeks ago, we did our last big run. It was about 25 miles with 6,000 feet of climbing. It took us all day. It was kind of a rough run because we'd never been on this particular trail before. And we ended up bushwhacking for a quarter of it.
That happens sometimes.
Yeah.
Part of the adventure.
Yeah. And it was hardcore bushwhacking, literally no trail, trees all around us. We had no idea where to go. So this 23-mile run that we thought would take us maybe 5-6 hours took us 9 hours.
Oh my goodness.
Plus it was 97 degrees. The last half of the run was fully exposed in the heat. Plus we were just totally drained and just burned out from all the training we've been doing. And it was a tough run, but we got through it. And then this last weekend was our last long run, which was just a quick 10 miles, 2,000 feet of climbing. Most of it was descending, was a point to point, so just kind of a nice, easy one. And now we're tapering. So not this weekend, but the following weekend is our first 100-mile race, and we are stoked.
That's super exciting. I have a quick question for you. I don't want to take too much time from our content we have coming up, but one of the things that really stands out to me with ultramarathoners is the mindset that goes into it.
Mm-hmm.
For you, talk a little bit about what your mindset is and how mentally you plan to tackle being able to run for 100 miles. You're out there for a long time. What does that look like to you?
Well, first of all, I'm really passionate about it. I love the mountains, and I just love to get up there and explore and see cool things and see wildlife, and just having that passion for the mountains makes it a little bit easier, and it makes it fun. Also, just all of the training that we've done, we spent so much time on our feet, we've kind of desensitized ourselves. In the beginning of this training, I remember getting a lot of anxiety before we went out for a long run. But now I'm just so used to it that the anxiety's gone and it's more excitement. Or if I'm not really feeling it, it's more just numb, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
I just do what I gotta do,
Gotcha.
And just, through the training, we've just have built that mental toughness. And
That's awesome.
the training has been tough. I can't even tell you, there have been breakdowns for me and my husband both.
I believe it.
There have been many breakdowns. Something that's nice with running with my husband is there's always someone next to us if we have a breakdown, there's always someone to pick us up and help us get to the finish, which has also been a really bonding thing for us too.
For sure.
Yeah.
So it's just breaking down those walls and just doing the training to desensitize yourself to it, I guess, and just getting your body ready. Our bodies feel better now too, so it's not necessarily easy, but it's easier because of the training we've done. Yeah. So
building that mental toughness as well as the physical toughness, right? That physical and mental resiliency.
Exactly.
That's what people don't realize, I think, a lot of the time with any race, but with marathon training or ultra distance training, the race day is tough, but honestly, it's the accumulated miles leading up to that nobody was there on your 50-mile run cheering you on or whatever. You just did that to build that mileage and build that resiliency or whatever. So it's funny, like on race day, I remember that in the marathon, like you have people lining the whole thing, cheering you on and whatever. It's like, well, where were all of you when I was doing a 20-mile run in the middle of the summer when it was, 90 degrees outside? And
how cool would that be if you're out on a run? There's just like hundreds of people lining the road for every one of your runs.
Let's go cheer on.
Everyone wakes up at 6 to go cheer on Cameron.
Go cheer on Cameron.
If we could arrange that, that'd be great. Yeah,
Yes.
that would be very motivating. But there's just so much that goes into what leads to that race day that we don't always realize, right?
Yeah.
That those are often harder runs than actual race day in some ways because there's just more to it, and you don't have the water every mile or the aid stations every so often,
people
or
to massage you.
Right. You don't have the support on most of your just training runs that make them brutal, but it helps build that mental toughness for race day, right?
Yeah, and I love that you brought that up because I feel like race day is the reward, which I actually don't feel
I love that.
that scared for the 100-mile race because we've done the hard part now. Now we get to celebrate and run 100 miles, and it's going to be awesome.
Right. Yeah, it's the test of your training, right? And I love that. I like that mentality a lot. Of that is where you get to kind of show off what you've been training for.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's fun. Yeah, that's why I did all the training, right? Yeah. I tell people that all the time. I don't run or exercise or whatever. I don't participate in fitness to lose weight or to stay in shape even or whatever. It's to be able to do the things I love to do. And I love that long run on a Saturday or that, big hike or backpacking trip or whatever. So the reason why I run is so that I can do the long run on Saturday. And so my runs throughout the week are designed to help me be able to do better on my long run on Saturday.
Reward on the weekend.
And then, those long runs also build into that race day eventually if you stack it all together, right? So, yeah, it's fun.
Yeah.
Well, cool.
Yeah, that kind of brings us into our topic for today, actually. Talking about the training that's leading up to a race. We're kind of going to dive into, the structure that we put into that training with our first topic here. We're going to talk about the continuity, the gradualness, and the modulation of our training programs.
Words.
And so the first one that goes over in the book is the continuity of a training program, and talking about how it's not about, putting in like one workout and then taking 3 days off and then do another really hard workout. It's about the long-term approach of consistent training day after day after day.
Right. Mm-hmm. Making your body get good at recovering and being resilient and putting that consistent load on. I tell that to patients all the time, whether your goal is to lose weight or to get in shape or to PR your race, that consistency is more important than intensity. That if I'm so intense on one day that I have to take the next few days off, then you really lose a lot of the benefit of that last run, and you're not really building quite as much as if you backed off maybe a little in any one run, but we're more consistent. We're able to be more consistent. You're going to see better success. And so your intensity has to be really calculated of how much and when, so that your other runs that are slow and steady, like we've talked about ad nauseum, slow and steady, don't overdo it, run slower than you think type of a thing, so that when you go to run fast, you have enough in the tank to do so and still run again the next day and the next and build that up. You're going to be better off to have more of that consistency and continuity of training.
Yeah. One of the things is in one of the athlete stories, he mentioned that there is no shortcut to durability.
Right.
And I love that.
Yeah.
Right. Because like you said, we can go and burn ourselves out with a really intense workout, patting ourselves on the back. Oh, I got that high heart rate and I pass all the other people on the trail, but you just end up beating your body up. And so really that continuity, dedication to that helps us build that durability so that we can, that when race day comes, that we're up to snuff, right? We've built all those systems in such a way that they can make it through that race and beyond. Again, kind of going back to that idea, like that we have some in the reserve. And so that's super important. And I think in saying that, it's really easy to be like, oh man, like, and I know this happens in not just training for running, but in other areas of our life, right? Oh, I'm going to do this. And then, I was supposed to do it today and I didn't, right? And beating ourselves up.
Yeah.
And that's, it's not about that. It's just being committed to a certain lifestyle, to a schedule, and really working to get that, with the understanding that sometimes we do need more recovery days, or there's a lot of stressors in our lives. And so as much as we need that continuity, we also need to be flexible within that continuity. And I think that ultimately is what gives us the most bang for our buck.
There's a lot of signs to be looking for as well with this continuity. If you're starting to feel like when you're training for a long period of time for anything, you're going to start to notice different changes within your energy levels and your sleep patterns and your stress, things like that. And so while it's super important to live and use your training style as like a continuous approach to a long-term success, you may start to notice that at times you feel over-fatigued or you feel extra stressed. And in those times, it's okay to back off a little bit. Some of those things can be signs that maybe you are overtraining for a little bit. And being able to incorporate the right amount of recovery into that to make sure that you are looking at long-term success as opposed to this steady decline to injury is really important in the long run and in practicing continuity.
Yeah. One of the things, I think it was last episode or maybe a couple weeks ago we talked about, was that a lot of times, and the news is especially good at that, right? Pulls this athlete and is like, oh, this is their training plan. Like, elite athlete, do this and you'll be successful.
Right.
And then people hit that and they're like, oh my gosh, my Achilles is killing me, or my hips are hurting, or any of those things, right? They just hit it at too high of an intensity.
Right.
And so I think really, and that goes to the concept of gradualness, is that when you're gonna, when you want to up that volume, or even if you're a beginner just starting out on the run, that you're not taking, the most intense workouts and applying it to yourself, that you're just, trying a little bit at a time and seeing how your body responds to that, right? You're not going out and running, going from 0 to, 15, 20 miles at once. You just add in a little bit at a time. And over time, right, we have those changes in our body, right? We develop that aerobic base. We have some of those positive anaerobic changes that allows our bodies to handle that load without, like you said, slowly declining to injury or just quickly going to injury, right? We hit it too hard and we injure ourselves. It's about listening to our body and seeing how it responds on a day-to-day and a week-to-week and a month basis so that we can make those changes in the time that we need them.
Yeah.
And just to reiterate, I know we've hit this point, being consistent doesn't mean that you have to work out 7 days a week. It's okay.
And it shouldn't.
No, it shouldn't.
Yeah.
It's important that you take a rest day. It just means if you take 1 or 2 rest days, get back up and get going after that.
Yeah. Yeah. And so it's definitely important to set a plan of like, if you are starting from fresh, never having run before, running 7 days a week is probably not a great idea.
No.
And so you may start at 3 days a week, but have a plan for how you're going to build up and be consistent with that plan. And so with the plan, the key is not missing those training volume days so that you're not getting behind on that and progressing along because the calendar says you should, but not having gotten all the miles in. And then you take too big of a leap at some point in time along the way. And that's where a risk of injury happens is you jump to that, from 3 days a week to 5 days a week, but you never did the 4 days a week because you kind of went on vacation or you got sick for a while. And that week where you, or those 2 weeks where you bumped up to 4 days a week, you missed those. And so you just went from 3 to 5. Your body might not like that so much, right? All of a sudden your training load increased by a huge factor. And now you're doing a lot more, almost double the amount of training load that you were doing before, and your body may not be ready for that. And so it's important to be careful about how you're increasing that. So
yeah, and I think with that, being realistic in your approach to training and in your goals, certainly shoot for those lofty goals and push yourself, right? That's definitely something that we want to do, but at the same time, be okay if you have to adjust those goals, right? If your plan was, I'm going to be running, this many miles a week by this date, and, there are those vacations or there's unforeseen circumstances, and you need to do that. Okay, well, maybe it's going to be, instead of 20 miles a week, maybe it's going to be 10 miles a week is the goal. And I can I can adjust my training plan and I can get back into that routine that will allow me to have success and still reach a really good and still a lofty goal.
Yeah.
I think where we sometimes run into problems is just like pursuing whatever goal at all costs.
Right.
The cost often being our own health, which is ultimately not worth it in the end.
Well, yeah, I see that a lot where people have a training plan on paper and they stick to that come hell or high water, and that's where they can get in trouble. Like if you miss too much time because of this, that, or the other, you need to modify that training plan. And racing is tricky that way because the race date doesn't bump back, right? And so you may have to reset your expectations of how you're going to perform on race day because of that. So that's part of it for sure.
The book references a 5% rule with modifying your training plan, that if you find that you've modified up to about 5% of your training volume over a span of a month, then you've probably modified it to the point where it's altering the results that you're getting. And so at that point, you should rethink your training plan and adapt to reality, because things like that are going to pop up. We all have lives outside of being athletes, outside of being runners. And so it's going to be common, and it's going to happen to all of us. And I think there's probably not one runner on the starting line of the race you're planning for, or whatever it is you're planning for, that didn't have to adjust in some way or another. So don't see that as a negative or something that like, I'm not going to run very well because this happened. Reality is it's happened to everybody. Just be real with yourself. And, if you've altered, 5% of your volume over the time of a month, then reevaluate what you're doing and just continue to move forward. And that's all you can really do at that point.
Yeah. And that's a pretty specific number, the 5%. I mean, when you think about that, if you have a goal to run 100 miles in a month, and you miss 5 of those miles throughout that month, then you ought not bump that up. So by the 10% rule of like, okay, so next month I can run 110, but if you ran 95 the month before, that's a 15-mile increase instead of just a 10-mile increase. And so it actually is a bigger leap. And so thinking about it in that way, you maybe need to cut that in half or maybe not go up quite as much as you were planning on going up. So maybe only go up by that 10% where you add another 9.5 miles on or 10 miles on instead. So you're running, instead of the 95 that you did before, the 105 instead, so that you're tapering that a little bit so that you're not blowing yourself up.
Or even incorporate some more cross training. That's another thing that it kind of talks about, is that some of these days, especially when we're talking about continuity, that you need to take off, can be more beneficial to incorporate some sort of cross training, give the regular demands that running has on your body a rest, and be able to do something to be able to kind of reset and keep your body moving through that time.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I love that point. You're right. Keep your body moving. In previous episodes, we've talked about kind of that active couch potato syndrome, right? That we run out and we do some hard workouts, and then the rest of the day is fairly inactive, right? We're just sitting around. And so that idea of incorporating as much movement as we can into our days, planning that in, and then using other modes of exercise to recover from. And that's actually great, right? Because we're still having a load, on our muscles, we're loading our joints, different things like that, but it's in a different way. And so it's challenging them in different ways. It's building our strengths in different ways. So that yes, we're going to be really good at running, but we're also going to help, hopefully injury proof ourselves from some of those things that can happen when we move into other planes of movement, which might not be as strong if running has been the only type of training that we've employed.
Yeah.
And it's important too, obviously specificity when you're training is really important. To be a good runner, you have to run. But at the same time, especially if you're a newer athlete, cross training still has a huge effect on your aerobic threshold, on other things as far as capillary density and your mitochondria density, things like that are still going to be super beneficial for you. And in the long run, are still going to make you a better runner.
Mm. Yeah, building up just that aerobic capacity, the ability of your body, your heart and lungs and your muscles to move oxygen and calories. That any type of training helps in some way. But then specificity of training is important to get the type of adaptation you're looking for the the event you're training for. So both are beneficial, right?
Yeah, yeah. And that also speaks to one of the other points in this book that we talked about is the modulation. If we decide, okay, I'm going to run at 5 miles, I'm going to run 5 miles a day, and that's what I'm going to do forever, right?
Right.
That will have some positive adaptations, right? We will build our aerobic base to a certain point. It's good to get that exercise. It's good to get that movement, but it's just going to plateau, right? We're not going to improve our performance on race day. And over time, it's actually going to wear us out if it's just 5 miles every day, 5 miles every day, 5 miles every day, right?
Yeah.
Our body needs those changing training types and those changing training loads.
Right, especially if it's the same type of 5 miles. So if you're just going out and running long, slow, steady, or kind of in between. So that's where most of us tend to run, is in between long, slow, steady, and fast. Mm-hmm. So, theoretically, you could run 5 miles every day if you mixed it up in how you're running it. One day it was hills, one day it was this and that. And you could use 5 miles for quite a long time in your training and do okay. You just have to mix it up enough to where the training load within that 5 miles is varied, right? So there's definitely different ways to increase the amount of load that you're taking on in that mileage. But definitely, if you do the same type of run the same way, it's gonna be not very beneficial. Your body will adapt, and then over time, you'll actually decrease in performance because you're not doing anything different to push your body to maintain that higher level. So.
Right. And this concept of modulation also includes thinking about factors such as sleep, stressors in your life, diet, everything like that you need to, okay, maybe life got a little bit crazy. It's okay to take a step back. Maybe I'm not doing as much right now. It's okay to push it a little bit more. So just taking everything into consideration as you adjust your training.
Definitely.
Yeah. And tracking your training so that you can see where to adjust. And tracking not just your training mileage or intensity or whatever, but tracking other factors that may affect your mileage. Like you mentioned, sleep, stress, diet, all kinds of different things. Tracking some of those things can help you as well. I get that can be heavy to track all of those things all the time. But it's important sometimes to check in maybe on certain factors, or if you notice that you're struggling in some area, to track it for a couple of weeks and see how are you doing with your sleep? How are you doing? What's causing you to be stressed out? What certain factors do you think might be affecting it? Track that for a little while by journaling. And then that allows you to say, okay, here are the patterns of what I'm doing, and here's the areas that I can correct, and here's the areas that I'm doing well that I need to keep up with.
Chair just collapsed.
It got too hot in here. What'd you eat?
Well, no, apparently I ate too much today.
All right. So that was interesting. So
sorry about that.
This room is getting hot. I'm on this high chair, and it's getting toasty in here.
I wore a jacket. What was I doing?
Yeah, I don't know. So I think that's what happened there. It got too hot, and the piston couldn't handle it. We just love to keep the comic relief for you, so getting bored watching, right? But yeah, that's pretty interesting. Being able to track certain areas of your fitness journey, your running journey, so that you can modify as needed. I'm a big believer in 1% changes, and journaling is a great way to make some of those 1% changes. We tend to like to overhaul things. It's like, oh, I read this latest book, or I read this, or I saw that, and I'm going to start training that way now. Now I'm going to be a 4-foot runner. And
I was just thinking a 4-foot tall runner.
That was my first thought.
I was like, is this a new thing? I have not.
Crouched running.
As in
really
the foot.
That forward lean. You gotta lean so far forward, you're only 4 feet tall.
Okay, yes.
So, running on your 4-foot so that you can change your running mechanics and get faster or things like that. And the problem is that's too big of a change. That makes a huge change in your running mechanics, and is one of those 20 or 30% changes instead of a 1% change. And the problem with a 20 or 30% change is it's too much of a difference in your training load, or just the load on your lifestyle. And so not likely that we can keep up with it, and we're likely to get injured, or it's going to backfire in some way in our life, socially or whatever. So we're better off making smaller changes, smaller adjustments, where we pick out one thing from our journaling that we can tweak. Like, oh, if I go to bed a half hour earlier, I tend to get more sound sleep, or I wake up fresher, or whatever that is. If I stop looking at my cell phone a half hour before I go to bed. Not a huge change necessarily. One of those little things. You know, a more extreme thing was, man, I'm spending too much time on my cell phone before I go to bed. That's it. I'm getting rid of my cell phone. Like, that's probably not going to work, right?
Yeah.
But saying I'm going to put my cell phone away and charge it away from my bed, buy an alarm clock instead of using the excuse of, well, I use it as my alarm. Buying an alarm clock, charging your phone somewhere further away from your bed, and not using it the half hour before you go to sleep. That's a 1% style change that can actually make a fairly big difference in terms of results.
Well, it's creating healthy habits, right? So you make one little tweak until it becomes a habit, until it becomes second nature, so you can focus on another little tweak. Until that becomes second nature, then you can focus on another little tweak until you just grow and grow as an athlete.
Yeah.
I think it's okay to have those big, 30% changes. But you have to build a roadmap to get there. It's not one big change.
Absolutely.
It's building a roadmap of 1% changes to get to that 30% change.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And so if you're working towards, if you want to become a 4-foot runner, or there's some like change like that, talk to or look into advice or expert advice from somebody that has run that way, and find out what it took to get to that point, and pick out, some small things you can choose along the way that will ultimately be able to adapt your training or your running into what you perceive it to be in the future based off of your goals.
Yeah.
Another interesting thing that I think happens with, at least I've noticed in those times that I've tried to make like those big changes versus small changes, is like where the goal's actually oriented. And I found that in those smaller changes, it's usually oriented towards like, what or who do I want to become, right? I'm making these small changes because I want to become a more fit individual, because I want to be able to spend time with my family. I want to be able to go out and do what I love without having to worry about getting injured.
Yeah.
Versus like, oh, I'm going to lose the 10 pounds, or like, I've just, I've got to get to like this place. There's not like, it's not so much about growth. It's about like pounding change in.
Right. Or superficial change for something.
Yes.
Like, I'm going on a cruise, so I need to lose these 10 pounds.
Yes.
Right? And it's not really about wanting to be healthier. It's trying to aesthetically please or whatever. Like getting a Boston qualifying time just so that you can say that you're a Boston qualifier, or to go on a trip with friends that are going to Boston or whatever. But that may be too big of a leap for you right now. And so shooting for that, even if you get it, you may be totally blown up from that to where when it comes time to run Boston, you're still injured and beat up. I've seen that actually many, many times, where people clawed, tooth and nail to be able to qualify, and then that like either had a really bad run or weren't able to qualify or weren't able to participate because they wound up with an injury in training to qualify for Boston. So like you got to be careful in how you go after and pursue those goals. You may get it and then regret it.
Right. Well, I think just being realistic behind what are your motivations for reaching these goals. And one thing that I think we've really tried to stress in each of our videos is like really building yourself into an explorer of the world, but also of yourself, of exploring, what you can do, and, how and being able to try new things. I think when those goals are coming from, well, how am I comparing to other people, or what are other people going to think of me, instead of like, again, who do I want to be and what's important to me, and not relating it to so much to like I guess these external factors or external drivers, but really like letting that change come from within. And if you're a person who just wants to be able to run a marathon because like that's important to you and you want to be able to do that, instead of like, oh, well, everyone in my family has run a marathon and I'm going to be a failure if I don't, right? I think that can make a huge difference, especially in like the stress that goes into some of our training. Naturally, training is going to be stressful because like it's
designed to be,
right? Like our body needs to adapt. But if we can remove some of those external stressors, and let it be more of a journey than that like that destination that we want it to be, or that it has to be, or I have to be this way, I think it becomes a lot more enjoyable and a lot more sustainable.
Yeah.
This is where I get so passionate, excited about running. When we talk about this core motivation and exploring ourselves, I feel like that's what running is all about. You learn so much about life and so much about yourself through running, and that's why I love this. So that just got me really excited.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Well, I think the goals, the goal setting, really does go back to kind of the next point of that individuality.
Yeah.
Yes.
The making sure that the way you're training, that it's individually set up for whatever your goal is so important, right? There's definitely certain aspects of training that are kind of base building aspects that are just getting the machine tuned up to be able to do the work, building up the battery, as it were, to be able to do the amount of work that we want to do. But then structuring that in an individual way that matches our personal capabilities, our personal the life situation, our personal stresses and motivators and all those things, that wraps that all into one, that so that we can match our fitness effort and our training efforts with our fitness goal, is huge. And so that's such a key, and that's a hard balance, making that an individual thing. It mentioned in the book that's like the bane of every coach's existence, right? That's so hard to take these tried and true training programs that they have that worked for athlete X over here, and they're just not working with athlete Y over here. And why is that?
Mm-hmm.
Why is that? Why can't athlete Y perform? They're doing the exact same thing. Why is it not working? Mm-hmm. And we see that too. Like every running guru out there has their marathon training plan or their whatever, and that's fine and good. But at the same time, that may not work for your body for whatever reason, right? We all have different feet and knees and hips and genetics and muscle fiber types and brains and stresses and, and not everybody's growing up was the same. And so the way they perceive exercise is different. And so, it may be more or less stressful or different things. And so there are just so many factors that go into how and why you have to individualize your training and pay attention to your body as you're going along. We love to be able to give people protocols of follow this and you'll be successful. But really, we have to dial in every single person's training plan to some degree, and that person needs to really listen to their body, and make sure they're making decisions that are best for their health and their long-term outlook. So, yeah.
That's something I've struggled with. As an athlete, I've kind of dabbled into the scene of coaching a little bit, and looking at other coaching programs and the way that they develop their athletes, and they have these almost cookie cutter pre-planned workouts, for you there. And I see that and I look at it for myself and I'm like, okay, well, I have one athlete here, this person wants to lose weight, and this person over here wants to get faster. They have two completely different goals, but they're in the same fitness right now. Does a cookie cutter training plan like that get them to both of their goals? And the answer is the short answer is no. There's so many different one gaining or losing weight versus performance is two very different physiological goals there.
Yeah.
And psychologically, it's very different too, I think.
Very different motivators. Yeah. The one may have been, the one that wants to get faster may have been running for 5 years.
Yeah.
But at the same fitness level as the person that hasn't been running at all but wants to lose weight. They may be at a relatively even fitness level, but one has built up more running tolerance. And so the training plan should be different.
Yeah. And it's easy to look at that. And in my perspective of, seeing a lot of other elite athletes training programs and like that is more or less that they should be used as benchmarks for, this is the amount of work that's taken them to get to that point. I should expect to be able to put in the same amount of time, whether that be from more running or recovery or doing something that's going to be pushing you to being the athlete that you want to be, as opposed to this is what I have to do. So,
I like that a lot.
For instance, one of the athletes that I really look up to, Eliud Kipchoge, for those of you who aren't familiar with him, he's a marathoner out of Kenya. He is the first guy to run a marathon in under 2 hours. And I just marvel at him as an athlete, but then looking at his training plan, obviously, just some incredible workouts in there. And while, yes, I would love to be able to run that fast, me jumping and doing his workouts, I wouldn't be able to absorb that training like he's able to, because he has so many other physiological adaptations through genetics of growing up in Kenya at high altitude, or the training that he's done previously that allows him to absorb that training in a way that I wouldn't be able to.
And just years of training. Yeah, years of training that Preston's building now. He's putting in the work now for 5-7 years from now, which it's a time game. Sometimes we have to put in the time to be able to build up that endurance and resilience and all those other things, to be able to not just be good once, but to consistently be a healthy and quality runner. We got to build the machine, and it takes time.
Exactly.
That's that sounds a little ominous and not very fun. Like, whoa, geez, man. But honestly, when somebody comes to me and says they want to run a marathon, I often will say, well, like, how do you want to run that marathon? I mean, we can get you to a marathon to where you can finish it in a fairly short amount of time. It just depends on how you want race day and the next 2 weeks afterwards to go. Like, do you want to be miserable, or do you want to run it at like pretty close to your capacity and feel fine afterwards, and the next 2 weeks are no big deal? Or do you want to really be miserable? And so that difference is usually training within like one season for the marathon, or saying this season we're going to build up your base, and the end of next season is when we're going to run that marathon. And if we do it that way, they could really have a great day, a great race, and PR and all those things. But really, if we want to train for something, it's going to take more time to build up the base to really do it the right way. But I mean, we can get you through a marathon, and so it just depends on where people are starting from and stuff like that. Some have already built up a bit of a base, but it is a time game, and we have to let time. And I think that goes back to that first continuity topic, right? That we just have to put in that continuity to get there.
Yeah.
Exactly. What I think is, anybody can run a marathon. Anybody can run 100 miles. And maybe that sounds crazy, but I think that the brain is so powerful that if you decided that I'm going to go run 100 miles and you have the mental toughness, you can do it. The point of training...
Mark's like, I don't know.
You guys maybe can do it. No, I get what you're saying with that.
Yeah.
The point of training is so you can do it quicker and with a lot less pain. Mm-hmm. That's why we train, right?
Right. Yeah, but if you told me, like, hey, your kid is 100 miles away, and if you don't get there by X hours, they'll be whatever. I probably could figure a way to get there, right?
Like these super moms who lift minivans on their kids.
I agree with that. That if where there's the will, there's a way, kind of a thing, right? Mm-hmm. And that just makes the training is what helps you get there without it being as awful.
Yeah, exactly.
Definitely. Well, and like, I think just when we kind of change our mindset about training, and we just drop that whole mindset of I've got to be the fastest and the best and et cetera right now, right? Like, we develop a mindset of like, okay, here's my goals and I can reach them. This is the plan that I'm going to do to get there. Then training actually becomes a lot more enjoyable.
Well, there's a purpose to it.
Yeah.
Right? When you know why you're training, for so many reasons, why certain workouts are hard for you and why certain workouts aren't hard for you, that play back into physiology. So whether you're fast twitch or slow twitch muscle fiber types, and what your previous training base is, right? You see that with people that used to run track in college, and so they're used to going really, really fast, but they're not necessarily used to building up endurance. And so switching that up and playing off of their muscle fiber type and really dialing in that individuality of their training plan for them. Putting that same person, that track athlete, on the same protocol that you put somebody that was maybe a cross-country runner. Many now overlap and do both, but you're not going to take, like, I ran the 100, 200, and 400 and be like, yeah, let's get you running a marathon next month. right? Probably not the right type of athlete.
Take the shot putter and say, you're in the marathon next week. Good luck.
We had somebody drop out of the 3 mile race, wondering if you could step in.
But understanding that definitely changes things. And that's one thing that Killian mentioned, is that like throughout his training, he was always asking questions and trying to learn more. And he's it's also mentioned, right? Like, yeah, you can go and train, but like understanding the training will make you so much better of an athlete. I think even for myself with running, right, I kind of avoided it for a long time and shoot it in favor of just like, I'm gonna go sprint, right? But then being like, oh my gosh, like I'm playing this longer game and why am I so exhausted, right? Like I sprinted there and like I did that and I was so fast and now I'm just like totally spending it. It's taking forever. And like not understanding the physiology of it years ago just made it very frustrating. But as I've come to understand the physiology and like understand the reasons for training different ways and why certain adaptations make more time, it's made it a lot more enjoyable. And so it definitely changed my whole approach to training and enabled me to do some things that my mindset previously didn't allow me to do. Not being patient enough to wait for some of the changes and be able to look forward into the future to see the results that I could get. I know one thing that we talk about a lot is, what we're doing today isn't necessarily so much affecting tomorrow. It's looking at what's happening 3 months out from now, what's happening, 9 months, a year, things like that. And being able to look into the future and make those plans with the understanding that, sometimes those plans are going to have to change and that's okay. Really, I think sets us up in a good way and a really good mindset for long-term success.
Yeah. I think one of the keys to long-term success is dialing in that continuity versus individuality. So like being consistent, making it fit you, but then also I think a key component is how then you recover from all of that.
Yeah.
So like the whole point of this is to add stress to your body so that you make your body make a change. But if we're not continually working on recovering adequately so that we can force those changes and allow our body to really adapt and keep recovering so that I can keep going again and again the next day and the next and the next, recovery really has to follow those same principles of individuality and modulation and things like that we have to recover in a smart way that really is based on you as an individual as well.
Yeah.
Otherwise, like if we're not recovering adequately, we're definitely going to bonk.
Right.
And so whatever that means for you as an individual, some people, like I know with Preston, for example, he comes in and we do some different recovery strategies that seem to work for him. Other athletes like massages or other athletes like ice baths, or some people like this and that and the other, the Theragun or the compression boots. Some people like it all. And I think that probably a combination of it all is not a bad thing to do until you can find out what really jives with you and really helps you. And I think doing all of those things and finding out what really does help you as an individual, the research on things like that is really varied and pretty poor for the most part. Most things show no hard evidence as to what's really clearly the best, right? In terms of recovery. And so it's finding for your body what helps you recover and feel most fresh and most ready to go again.
Yeah.
And just a little side note on recovery. Even if your body feels good, but your brain is burned out, maybe you just need a mental break. Maybe you're just tired of seeing the track. Maybe you're just tired of being on the trail. It's important to give your brain a break too. Maybe you give it a break by switching it up. So instead of going to the track, you go on the trail. Or instead of going to the trail, you go to the track. Or maybe you're just tired. Your brain is just tired of running. Maybe you just need to sit and do nothing and let your brain rest.
Well, I think that's absolutely true. That's where you go hit a yoga studio, or you go paddleboarding, or you go climbing. Preston climbs a lot too, right?
I do, yeah.
Give you a mental break and an other physical activity that gives you that same kind of like, I don't know, that same feeling of exhaustion and exertion and whatever. More exertion than exhaustion, I guess. But where you're working hard physically, but it's something different. I think that's actually an important recovery strategy is cross training in some way.
Oh, definitely, yeah. And I mean, to be clear with this, definitely you don't want to use this as an excuse to shirk off any training that you are doing. I always like to ask myself some questions before, I decide ultimately, am I going to cross train today? Am I doing this because I feel like it's going to be better for my training, or am I doing this because I'm feeling lazy today? And making sure that you're honest with yourself with those answers can ultimately help you live up to the goals with continuity, with having a gradual training plan, but at the same time focus on recovery and your mental health with doing different workouts and the cross training as well.
Yeah, why am I feeling lazy today? That may be your next question, right? If I am, that's fine to be real with yourself. Okay, if I am feeling lazy today, why? Mm-hmm. And what can I do to modify that, right? What can I do to improve that situation so I feel better and I'm not so burnt out by my running and whatever. So.
Yeah, I actually really like that point, that metacognition, right? Thinking about your thinking. That was
I'm smelling the smoke, the gears. I was stuck on metacognition.
But leave it to Mark to throw out that awesome thing.
I don't have a dictionary.
But taking time to check in on those things and go a couple levels deep, right? Okay, is it because of this or this? And then why? Why am I feeling that way? And being willing to ask yourself questions and be real with yourself, right? Because I know that there's so many times that I pull up a litany of excuses not to do a workout. But ultimately it's just I'm feeling lazy and I just don't want to, I want to eat potato chips on the couch, right? Yeah. And so I think it's important because at that point, right, when we're able to kind of dial in on that, then that can help us make difficult decisions when we don't necessarily have the motivation to enact those, because I think more often than not, action comes before motivation. So if we're able to take a serious look at what we're doing and say, okay, these are my long-term goals, and I may not presently feel like doing this, I may feel like being lazy, I can still make the choice to take that action and to develop that continuity and to continue to work towards my goals.
Boom, and there's another real-life tie-in. Ask yourself, why am I not going to class today? Why did I react that way?
Yeah, but it's really cool, right? Because it allows us to take a step back from really what can be overwhelming emotional responses too. I really like, why did I not want to do school today? Or why did something someone said aggravate me so much? So instead of just pouncing on things, we can take a step back and create some space between the thought and the response, right? Between the emotion and the reaction. Yeah. And that, I think, ultimately is another really helpful way to help us to grow and to help us reflect on why we're making the decisions we're making and who we're becoming in the process of making those decisions.
Yeah.
Boom.
All right.
Cool. Should we get into some questions?
Yes.
Yeah. Finish up on that then?
Definitely.
Yes, sir. Okay, so...
Yeah,
sorry.
No, you're good.
Okay, so questions we have. Somebody commented they wanted to know more about the 10% rule on the topic of gradualness. Is this bogus? Is this a good rule to follow?
So, like many things, it fits the big bulk of the population well. Mm-hmm. But there's no hard and fast rule. There's been no really good quality studies to validate the 10% rule. It's more something that coaches came up with. And so it's not a bad idea, and it's an okay rule for kind of that middle range runner. But if you're at the high end or at the low end, if you're starting out just running around the block and then you're going to improve by 10% per week, before you're up to 2 or 3 miles, it's going to be months.
Yeah. If you run a quarter mile around the block, that's
right. That's a slow progression.
0.02 every week.
Right. And so, that's not...
Promise I did more.
Right. So, that progression may be too slow, where it's not, you're not building in a meaningful way. So I maybe go by time more there, where you're adding in time by 10%. But even then, that 10% gets pretty out of control. If Preston, for example, built up his mileage by 10%, on a week where he ran 120 miles, and then the next week had to add, 12 more miles onto that, that may be
Yeah.
pretty significant jump,
in
right?
the span of a month, I'd be running 170, 180.
Yeah.
Which is well beyond my capabilities.
That's well.
When it comes to that sanity of running a lot, I don't think I'd be very sane at that point either.
No.
So.
But he'd just have to run with a feed bag on, right?
Hold an IV around with me.
Yeah, there you go.
But so like the 10% rule is a great rule of thumb for people that have been kind of running in that like 2 to 5 miles a day, like 3 to 5 days a week. That's an okay time to use that 10% rule to progress up into higher distances or higher times, and to build your mileage that way. But once you start running kind of much over about 35, 40 miles a week, it starts to become a lot bigger leaps in 10%. And so be careful with that. I would say time is maybe a little bit better way of judging that, but it can get out of control pretty quick too. So when that starts to feel big, those leaps in improvement or in increasing that intensity, I'd say back off that a little bit. You may bump down to less than 10% because, yeah, like we said, Preston would be just running
I wouldn't
nonstop.
be here right now. I would be running right now.
Right,
so.
right. Just enough time to go to the bathroom. You'd be Forrest Gumping it, basically.
Yes.
Just running across the country coast to coast. Like,
There you go.
yeah. When I was hungry, I ate. I love that. Some of those quotes are awesome.
Yeah, I realized that was a bogus rule when I was making my program for my first 50-mile run. And I increased it by 10% every week. And we had like 6 or 7 months. And I just kept going. And the numbers kept getting bigger. And I was like, oh, geez. Until we were running like 120 miles a week, which is what you do. But that would drive me insane.
Individuality.
Individuality.
Yeah. But, I mean, realistically, unless you're your lifestyle is set up to where you can do that, that's a lot of miles to try to fit in. And so, I mean, Preston's kind of in a unique situation where he's tailored his life to be able to do that, and that's awesome. And it's helping him to kind of, hit some really fast numbers and be a really quality runner. But that may not work for the guy that has 4 kids and a job and owns his own business and stuff like that.
You don't know like that? I haven't met.
Yeah, like that would be really hard for me. I mean, I spend 4 hours a day at softball games and basketball games and football games. And so like that'd be really hard to get in 20 miles a day. And so, yeah, it definitely, that individualization, all of those things that we talked about today play into that big time, into why that 10% rule works for a little while. I think it's not a bad rule for taking a leap from kind of a recreational runner up to trying to be a little bit more competitive or at least, age group type wins and stuff like that. I think it can help move that person along, but from the very beginning or at the high end, it's not very effective.
Yeah, definitely. And pay attention to your body throughout it too. Even if you are in that middle ground, notice the different indicators. If you feel overly fatigued, if you're can't get enough calories, if you can't sleep, things like that.
Yeah.
Good sign that the 10% rule is probably too much for you at that point.
Right. And 10% rule may be great in March, April, but may not be great in July, August, right? The heat and other factors may make that a little bit harder to climb in your mileage quite as well. So really listen to your body, look at your heart rate. Like if it's getting progressively higher with the same runs instead of getting progressively lower, then we're probably overtraining. If your heart rate variability, so looking at your heart rate first thing in the morning when you get up, if that's higher progressively, then things like that may be something we want to look into and say, I'm probably overtraining. I should back off a little bit and temper that 10% and maybe go 5 or 2 or 0 for a couple of weeks and just let your body catch up and then build from there. So, yeah.
Okay, our next question was, how do you balance continuity with rest? And I feel like we kind of answered this already, but as I got more information about this question, they're just confused about, okay, well, I need to be consistent, but what if I take 2 or 3 days off to rest? How do you balance that?
Yeah, I think that goes back to that 5% rule and just making sure you get the training time in before you move forward.
Definitely. And again, like if you are finding yourself having to take more and more rest, then it goes back to what we talked about before, is modifying that training plan, right? If it was originally to run 100 miles a week and you just have to keep taking rest days and have to keep rest not 100 miles a week. I would not be running that. I mean,
Some people do. Some people do.
But anyway, but then, like, you know, maybe it's down to that 50 or 25 miles, and being able to adapt so that, like, because that's one thing that your body is telling you, right? Like, I need rest, I need rest, I need rest. Then that's a really good sign that you're just constantly overloading it more than it can really handle for the training load that you're trying to put on it.
Yeah.
And so being able to take a step back and either take more rest days and, like, extend that goal out a little bit longer, or change that goal within kind of that same training schedule.
Okay.
So basically, if you're so tired that you can't be consistent with it, back off.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, well, that's it for the questions. Is there anything else that you guys want to talk about or touch on?
That's everything for me.
Yeah, I think
Okay.
we hit it.
Good.
This chapter especially is just so packed full of
It
information
is.
that's so critical
Awesome.
to not just the uphill athlete, but really to anybody training. So great stuff. Fun chapter.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, absolutely. So don't forget to post a comment below if you have any questions on this episode, or if you have any questions on what you read, and we'll answer your questions in our next episode. Next week, we're going to be going over pages...
116 to 129.
Thank you, Mark.
There you go. Recovery and fatigue. So, obviously recoveries, we've had a lot about it, but we'll dive a little bit more into that. We'll go over Tim Noakes' central governor theory and fatigue. So if you want to know what that is, stay tuned and you'll find out next time.
Yeah, read along.
Yeah.
All right, quick shout out to our sponsors. So shout out to the Utah Running Shop. Shout out to the Oakwood to Stansbury Trail Series by Jimmy Thomas. And shout out to the Wasatch Run Club.
Yeah. Wasatch Run Club, my group I started, and really it's a group for everybody. We want people to come out and just enjoy running, and more of a social thing. Every Wednesday night, check us out on Facebook or on our website, wasatchrunclub.com.
Cool.
All right, thanks, guys. We'll see you next Monday.
Sweet.
Okay.